Nelson Peltz has a long history of attacking companies to the ultimate detriment of shareholder value.
Bobby Newport's never had a real job in his life.
His quest also seems more about vanity than a belief in Disney.
Bobby Newport.
Bobby Newport.
Bobby Newport.
And then there's Jay Rasulo, a former Disney employee who was passed over for a promotion nearly a decade ago. He hasn't been employed since leaving Disney.
Bobby
Newport.
What's more, Peltz and Rasulo have teamed up with another disgruntled former employee, Ike Perlmutter.
All right, now we're just wasting time, Jerry.
Renegade Online.
Good Lord, you could be forgiven for thinking this was a campaign that was cut by an opposition research firm that works for the DNC. I guess Disney's taking pages from the 2024 election playbook now in their proxy war with Nelson Peltz and Trian management. Welcome back, folks. It's another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Make sure to join us every Sunday afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern right here for the live show. It's been nearly 2 years since Nelson Peltz began his first campaign to become a board member at the Walt Disney Company, with his first proxy fight beginning in 22 and ending in 23 after Bob Iger and folks there promised him that, well, what he wanted would actually happen. Nelson Peltz walked away, but unfortunately Bob Iger didn't, violating one of his biggest promises, which was to find a successor in a timely manner. 3 or 4 months after that proxy campaign ended and the board of directors, as Bob Iger wanted, was reelected, Bob Iger got himself appointed for another 2-year extension as Disney CEO. And what happened? Well, just as before, the stock price started out pretty good in the beginning of the year and then slowly devolved into where it was around the time that Nelson Peltz jumped back into the fray in October of 2023. Trian's website, restorethemagic.com, and the 133-page report to Disney shareholders that we've covered here on this channel before went into great detail about all of the things that Peltz and company feel are going wrong at the Walt Disney Company. Bob Iger's response has been simply, I don't need this distraction. I don't think we need to remind folks all of the failures that the Walt Disney Company has had, not only at the box office, but on Disney Plus as well, which is consistently getting trounced week after week after week in the Nielsen ratings, with some of the biggest and boldest intellectual property like Marvel and Star Wars at their disposal. Matter of fact, the only thing that's keeping Disney Plus on the Nielsen reports week in and week out is a property that they lease from somebody else, namely Bluey.
The last thing that we need right now is to be distracted.
Bob Iger is his own worst distraction, but we'll get to more of that in a moment.
What's the harm of letting activist investor Nelson Peltz or Jay Rasulo have a seat on Disney's board?
Yeah, that's a great question. What is the harm at this point?
The answer is simple. If they succeed, Disney could suffer the same fate as other great companies that Peltz has previously infiltrated.
Other companies that Peltz has previously infiltrated. Listen to the language that's being selected. Listen to the tone of voice, the inflammatory verbiage that's being thrown in. This is straight out of a political campaign op-ed hit book.
Nelson Peltz has a long history of attacking companies to the ultimate detriment of shareholder value.
Nelson Peltz attacks companies to the detriment of shareholder value. And of course, they list all of these things just on the screen. Here's some names that you've seen before, right? Not any real numbers behind it. And this is one of the things that you're going to notice throughout this video that's a theme. It's just like a lot of Bob Iger's recent speeches. Places like Morgan Stanley or an earnings call, where they throw a lot of pie in the sky or spaghetti against the wall, as Nelson Peltz says, absent any real data, absent any real comparative metrics. Hey, we're going to spend $60 billion to improve the parks. Where? On what? What's the plan? Don't know. We're going to invest $1.5 billion in Epic like they talk about. What's that going to look like? No, this is just, we're going to throw some famous words and names in your face and hope that you're ignorant enough to let it just go right over your head.
His quest also seems more about vanity than a belief in Disney. Why else would he sell 500,000 Disney shares over the past 6 months in the middle of his Proxy fight?
Why did Nelson Peltz sell 500,000 shares of Disney? Who cares? He doesn't run Disney, at least not yet, or maybe not ever. But you know who does? Bob Iger. Bob Iger has sold millions of shares, tens of millions of shares over his 20-year tenure as CEO. I can't actually believe that they brought this up in this ridiculous ad that Nelson Peltz sold some shares of Disney recently. Bob Iger owns next to nothing by comparison of Disney, and yet nobody is questioning the CEO. Give me a break.
Plus, he has no media expertise and no experience in running a global entertainment company powered by creativity.
Okay, who cares? Look at the vast majority of the Walt Disney Company's board of directors that they have. There are very few people on that board that have any type of media or entertainment experience. They come from other industries, which is fine. But again, we're now lobbing accusations at Nelson Peltz that doesn't seem to play ball here. Tell me what the media experience of Disney has been in the past several years. Lots of box office failures, mediocre performance on Disney Plus, a declining linear cable package that they invested billions more to add to in 2019 with Fox, as Nelson Peltz correctly pointed out, was way too much money at exactly the wrong time when that industry was on the decline. But I guess cranking out garbage like The Marvels and Strange World and Lightyear and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and on, failure after flop after bomb after fail. Now, I guess that's fine. Let's just let things keep going the way they are at Disney.
They said I have no media experience. I don't claim to have any.
Good. That's probably for the best.
Then there's Jay Rasulo, a former Disney employee who was passed over for a promotion nearly a decade ago. He hasn't been employed since leaving Disney, and the last time he joined the board of a media company, the stock tanked.
Okay, trying to compare his time at iHeartMedia. All right, let's get something straight here. This is the Jay Rasulo hasn't done anything since he left Disney business. Again, to try to scare people into thinking that he was just a failure. The man was at the Walt Disney Company for 30 years. He was at the Walt Disney 10 years before Bob Iger showed up. This man knows Disney inside and out. I think it is completely disingenuous to try to compare his singular board seat at another media company to what he could potentially offer in the boardroom of a company that he was an executive for of 30 years in his final tenure there as chief financial officer. This guy was around when everything started going to hell in a handbasket at the Walt Disney Company, and that is exactly what Bob Iger is most afraid of, is somebody like Jay Rasulo having a voice on the board that knows where all the skeletons are buried.
What's more, Peltz and Rasulo have teamed up with another disgruntled former employee, Ike Perlmutter.
Oh, no, not Ike Perlmutter. Oh, my God, another guy who was at Disney for a good 10 years or so after selling Marvel Entertainment to the Walt Disney Company for about $4 billion, which is where Mr. Perlmutter acquired the largesse of his Disney stock, which he still holds, and has pledged his proxy to Nelson Peltz and Trian for this very shareholder fight. Now, Ike Perlmutter, we all know over the last several years, he and Bob did not get along at all. And there were a number of reasons for that. Perlmutter wanted to really keep the Marvel Studios projects under budget and moving more efficiently, and wanted to stay with the big popular characters. Kevin Feige had a different plan for phases 4 and 5. They wanted to go with more diverse and representative characters, kind of go off the rails, go into what has now been coined as the MCU, where you have this all-female-led new phases 4 and 5. And of course, what's happened to the MCU? It has tanked. They have had one box office flop after another. The only thing that's worked has been surprise Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, even on Disney's own books and records, is held separate and apart financially from the rest of Marvel, in part because of their deal with Sony, but also in part because Spider-Man is practically a brand unto itself. And that movie was so big and popular that it artificially spilled over into the next Marvel entry that actually came out under the Disney distribution banner, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, without which there's no way that movie would have even sniffed anywhere near the $900+ million that it got. It probably would have performed much more like the other Marvel movies that we've seen to date in phases 4 and 5, probably averaging somewhere around $400 to $500 million or less.
Ike Perlmutter, who has his own lengthy record of destructive behavior inside Disney. Perlmutter has a well-documented grudge with Disney CEO Bob Iger.
I wonder why. Now you're starting to see why a lot of these hit pieces in the media and the articles that have come out over the last few years, it was basically to set up this kind of stuff to where Bob Iger could have a shelter. Because remember, Bob Iger can do no wrong. His ego is so big and so grand that it's basically omnipotent and perfect. Only people like Ike Perlmutter are the real agitators inside Disney, trying to do what exactly? I don't know, make money? The real issue never seems to change, and that is that you do not question or cross the king of the Bob Iger Company.
This sort of personal animus in the boardroom is more than disruptive, it can be destructive. Especially at this critical time when, despite all of these distractions, Bob Iger and his management team have engineered an ambitious plan to build Disney's future.
All right, here we go. And again, they're going to go through a litany of all the garbage they've mentioned on recent earnings calls and different press junkets, talking about the new investments in Disney parks and the new partnership with Epic Games. And again, I remind folks, we really don't have any information on that. And Peltz and Trian have asked the same questions. Could you actually give us some numbers, Bob? What can shareholders expect from this massive amount of capital invested? You know, a lot of these shareholders are probably still asking questions about what the hell happened to $70 billion that you spent of our money on buying Fox. It doesn't seem like we've really gotten a great return on invested capital there. What has actually been done with it, except to maybe pilfer off a few shows to put into Hulu, the share of Hulu that Fox owned, which, of course, Disney is still going to have to shell out another $10 to $20 billion to get the rest of the stake from Comcast, which they're undergoing right now. Where does the spending end? How many more credit card swipes are we going to have with this? And at no point have we really gotten any information on what sort of eventual return we're going to see from $100+ billion of capital investment. We've talked about this before. Bob Iger tells shareholders he's going to take their credit card, go out and buy a new toy. They get all excited about it. It does okay for a few years, or in rare cases does spectacularly well when left alone and actually serves the audience it was intended to serve. Kind of like Marvel in the very beginning, phases 1 through 3. But eventually, Iger and company turn around and break that toy, or in some cases, immediately break that toy, like they did with Star Wars, and then have to turn around and go ask the shareholders for another pile of money to go buy a shiny new toy so that you forget about the last toy that Bob Iger and company broke. And to make the root cause of that abundantly clear of what's gone wrong in the last 5 or 6 years, well, it's because Bob Iger himself was the architect of all of the destruction of the creative talent pool that Disney used to have. It began with running off people like John Lasseter, who created Pixar effectively and made it what it was, beginning with Toy Story, and then oversaw nearly everything that Disney was producing right up until he was Me Too'd and shoved out the door by Bob Iger back about 7 or 8 years ago. And since then, a lot of other Disney veteran creatives have pieced out as well, leaving behind not but the new guys and girls out there. And, well, if you want to get an idea of what the new folks are doing, let's ask Jennifer Lee, who basically took John Lasseter's former position. Immediately following the disastrous opening weekend of the massive flop strange world. Film Threat here says that the return to Disney Animation Studios after a very long Thanksgiving weekend was not good. That Monday, the staff was greeted with a very glum Zoom call as a way to soothe everyone's feelings. One source tells us at Film Threat that the Disney executive's message, that would be Jennifer Lee, was essentially, quote, "This is a bummer, but the message is important and we will press on with it." That message, of course, was surrounding the film's inclusion of LGBTQ themes and representation for kids. Hey!
The last thing that we need right now is to be distracted in terms of our time, our energy by an activist or activists.
Okay. All right. Let's stop it right there. The whole distraction issue, this is Bob's big mantra for this whole campaign against Peltz, is that he's just a distraction. And let's just go ahead and remind folks of the last 5 years of the performance of Disney compared to the broad market indexes. On the top, 117% for the NASDAQ, 86, almost 87% for the S&P 500, and at the very bottom, you guessed it, for the Walt Disney Company, 1%. Oh, but Valiant Iger keeps telling us that it was all Bob Chapek's fault. The problem with that, of course, is that now we even have it in Bob Iger's own words. Just last week at the Morgan Stanley conference, we know fundamentally that the most important thing is to create great things. And I'm sitting here today, whatever how many years I've been with this job, I guess an 11-month interruption of sorts for what was a pleasant retirement, and I feel great. It was actually 10 months and about 3 weeks, Bob, to be exact, that was the interruption that you're referring to that we know as Bob Chapek. So tell me again how somehow in less than 11 months, Bob Chapek came in and did all of this damage to Disney. The fact of the matter is he didn't. It was you. You were there for a good nearly 20 years before that happened, and you're still there now. You were supposed to retire and be replaced with a successor some half a dozen times by now, but you're still there. Jay Rasulo was supposed to be one of those candidates to take over. He was at the top of your list just a few years ago. Now you hate the guy. Now you have an axe to grind with him. Kind of have to wonder if Kevin Mayer and Tom Staggs wouldn't be standing with Nelson Peltz right now if Bob Iger hadn't cut them a big fat check last year too. Oops.
After a year of significant fixing that made way for a new era of building for growth, the Walt Disney Company has turned a corner and is focused on creating lasting long-term value.
After a year of fixing what, I might ask? I can't really figure that out. Now, they talk about all of the cost cutting. They talk about a dividend they've announced and a recent increase to that dividend, which wasn't that big to begin with. But as I remind folks, most of this was accomplished by doing what? Actually cutting $7.5 billion in bloated spending. That's a great start. But as I've said before, cutting can only get you so far. You can reach some temporary profitability by doing that, but you can't cut your way to growth. And if somebody can please explain to me what they see on the horizon for the Walt Disney Company, especially on the creative and studio side, that is going to fix that problem, I'd love to hear it.
Recent stock performance, improved operating income, as well as the strategic moves recently made by the company.
Again, all due mostly to cuts. That operating income has increased because they've slashed expenses. And don't forget, a lot of that was also helped out by the fact that the vast majority of 2023, well, studio and content production that they spend billions of dollars a year doing was largely shut down, thanks to strikes by both actors and writers. So in other words, imagine if Disney just had a regular year where they had routine, normal film and television production for Disney Plus. The numbers wouldn't have looked near this rosy. And that's a hat trick that's going to be very short-lived. Bob Iger knows this, but he's counting on you who are watching videos like this from Disney not understanding that. Ask yourself this. If none of that makes sense to you, would it be easier to understand that Disney only has 3 or 4 big films coming out this year instead of 7 or 8? And the number of big-budget major IP shows on Disney Plus has also dwindled significantly for this year and perhaps even into next.
Nelson Peltz and Jay Rasulo threatened to jeopardize the incredible progress the company has made since Bob returned as CEO. At this critical moment, we simply cannot let that happen.
Nelson Peltz and company are jeopardizing the progress that Disney has made since Bob returned as CEO. It's all about Bob, isn't it, right? Not Disney is making progress. So they have to stick that in there. It's all about Bob. We got Bob Iger back. He's the savior. He's the one that screwed everything up the last several years, but he's going to fix it this time. Nobody wants to ask the real questions that we've been asking here on Valiant Renegade for years. At what point is Bob Iger actually going to be held accountable for his mistakes? It never seems to happen. And the man just keeps getting renewed and renewed and renewed. And you wonder why he wants his own patsies on the board to make sure that keeps happening. A lot of these misstatements of fact, as Disney refers to it in their video that they allege that Nelson Peltz are making, are things we've already covered in this video to this point. But if you want to go read them, they're on the Vote Disney website under this fact versus fiction page. You be the judge yourself, talking about Jay Rasulo's other board experience, some of Peltz's claims, Peltz's selling of 500,000 shares in the last quarter, but yet no mention of the millions and millions of shares sold by Bob Iger over his tenure at Disney. I continue to find it terribly amusing that for something that Bob Iger and the Bob Iger Company consider a mere distraction, they sure do seem to be getting distracted by it a whole lot. Have to ask yourself why that is. We'll find out at the annual shareholder meeting coming up. April 3rd, we'll be covering it here live on Valiant Renegade. Stay tuned for that one. And until next time, take care. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.